Hey, Mike, great to see you. Let's talk about sports. Looks like you've got the right background there behind you, so I think you're ready to talk sports, which is great.
Ready to go.
Let's talk about the obviously how the pandemic impacted live sports. It came back eventually with incredibly strong viewing numbers and new innovation in terms of how fans could get access to new content and perspectives on their favorite teams and individuals. But how have you seen brands adapting to this new world, and what are their expectations? How have their expectations changed in terms of their investment?
Yeah, I think we learned a lot coming out of the pandemic and the role of sports. I think we all expected that there would be this kind of mad rush to sports viewing. And I don't know that it came quite as quickly. I think that, the fact that by the time sports came back, people were adjusted to a new way of living and working. It was a little later in the summer. And honestly, there was such a glut of sports happening at the same time that I think that fragmented the viewership a little bit. But at the same time, there was that the audience that came was that highly desirable audience. And it's still one of the few places where you can create such excitement and buzz, create live viewership, get younger viewership, get male viewership. So all of those things came along with it, just in a slightly different shape and size than we thought. And I think that brands had to adapt very quickly. There's the media plan piece of it, that you're delivering your GRPs and your traditional ads, but there were new opportunities. We saw what ABI did with the NBA and the virtual fan, Microsoft as well, and a lot of people taking advantage of the fact there were no fans in the stadium. So how did you create an interactive experience? What the NFL did with the draft and having kind of those fan screens. So I think what we've seen too over time is the importance of fans in a stadium to the broadcast. I mean, you watch a football game now and they are using the background noise of fans because it's part of the way we're used to seeing it. And I think that that's important. And, so it gives brands a different way to think about it. If you think about the pregame shows, there's still those integrations that exist, but that fan experience is so different, and brands have had to think of creative ways to help the broadcast move along in that space.
Yeah, I've been really surprised in a pleasant way about the way in which certain sports have adapted to this new world. And golf is a great example where we've kind of get to be kind of almost inside the rope now with hearing the players talking to their caddies. And I think that innovation, it'll be interesting to see which parts of that those kind of innovation and sort of new experiences are going to stay once those fans are allowed back in.
Yeah, I think we're seeing, different camera angles. To your point, we're seeing different interactions, especially in golf. I mean, golf might be the one sport that's actually, with or without fans, about the same experience. But, I think for football and for basketball, college basketball, like so much of the excitement of some of these games, to see, Cameron Indoor Stadium at a Duke game with no fans just isn't the same as when you see the Cameron Crazies playing their role. And I think it's changed the competition of the games a little bit too. But I think it will actually help viewership a little bit as fans start to come back into play. And kind of recreate the sports the way that we knew it.
Yeah, it's renewing those connections maybe in a slightly different way, but obviously the viewing experience can continue to evolve, which is great. So last year obviously was very different for so many reasons, and it was the unpredictability of what we were all facing that created challenges for us within the advertising industry. I remember we had a conversation back in April with a number of your agency peers about the upfront and how big a role sports plays in brands' marketing plans. So to a certain degree, how sports came back would have an impact on the marketplace. Maybe you can share what you've seen as we've kind of gone through 2020 and now we're kind of going into 21.
I think the biggest thing, much like we're talking about across all media channels, was the needs for brands to be flexible and fluid. We're doing everything based on what we know to be true, but that could change very quickly. So is a game or a week of games canceled or moved because of COVID? Is a schedule disrupted? And brands have to be able to quickly react to that. I think, football was the one that we're all holding our breath on. Would it come back on time? It's such a hugely important part of not just media plans, but marketing plans and activations and the way that you do that. And I'm very interested to see as we get closer to the Super Bowl, how brands are going to activate in and around the Super Bowl. There's the social tension in the country. There's a different viewing experience. The on-site activations won't be the same. So the way that brands show up at the Super Bowl is going to be a good case study for us. But the flexibility was really the key, and the ability. I think in those first few weeks, you had advertisers who were used to buying the NBA Finals, say in June, but now they were buying them in September and October. So even the range of advertisers that were looking at these different sports because they were falling at a different time made us think differently about how we approach that. And then, of course, like you mentioned, for the upfront marketplace, the importance of just simply that supply that existed in the market could have a huge impact. And it's, again, we want to be flexible and fluid with our dollars across screens and day parts and follow audiences. But there is a reality to big GRPs showing up every Saturday and Sunday, big GRPs showing up for the World Series. So how do you build a media plan around that? If you're a promotions-driven company, if there's a release date that you're trying to aim towards. So brands needing to think more about, if I have to shift, where can I find that audience? Do I need to go to social? Do I need to up my search budget? Do I need to be flexible in terms of what I used to be willing to air in versus what I'm willing to air in now?
Yeah, let's talk about that kind of multi-screen world that we live in. Content distribution has obviously changed significantly over the last few years. OTT, mobile is just yet another screen, yet another way in which people are choosing to view live sports, to view sports on demand, view clips. What do you see as the implications for the future of sports and for advertisers in that multi-screen world? And how do you think about that from an audience and demographic perspective? For example, you mentioned younger viewers earlier. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
I think there's a couple of things in there. I think, the access is number one. If you're a fan, whatever you're a fan of today, you can find that sport. So that will lead to some fragmentation. And that, maybe it's not 10 million people all focused on one game. I think we see this a lot with baseball. It's while it's the national pastime, it's really a local sport. You're rooting for your home teams. And I think what the OTT platforms have done is give people access, again, to more content than ever before, more games, more pre-game, post-game analysis, things like that. And I think younger audiences like that because they want to be in control of that experience. I also think it puts a lot of emphasis on highlights and what is the viewing experience for the next generation. These audiences are used to not watching a 3 or 4 hour game all at once. They're going to consume 10 games within that window, and it's going to be highlight focused. It's going to be analysis focused. So, and we're seeing, the implications of that as it comes through the betting sites and the way that we think about what excites these viewers. I think, again, just the ability to follow that audience. So to talk about audiences versus just broad demographics, to be able to engage in an addressable way, even in sports, and find that passionate viewer who's watching their local college team versus being forced to watch whatever the network has decided is the game of the week. So I think there's only upside to it from an advertiser standpoint. It's the addressability. It's getting that passionate fan where they want to be, as opposed to the opposite way. But it's going to, I think that the viewing experience is going to really change over time. Younger audiences, especially the much younger audiences who grew up in this space, they don't want to watch a 3 hour football game. They want to see, how's their fantasy football team doing? I want to see action and highlights, and I want to be made aware of these things. So they're bouncing back and forth between social platforms, connected TV platforms, the live viewing experience. It's just a completely different user experience than you or I would have had growing up watching, whatever game they decided to put on at noontime or 4 o'clock.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there that you just talked about that's sort of indicative of our overall industry, and this notion that we have to move to an audience-based model because the fragmentation exists. The audiences are showing up in different and surprising sometimes places, and so finding that balance between having a spot in the halftime show because the CMO wants to see it there versus finding those actual audience members that you really will need to find in ancillary programming, or maybe even sports programming that you didn't even think about, but based on the data we can actually find now. So that's really interesting.
And we're at an inflection point. I mean, like, those things are still important. There is still a lot of value in the halftime sponsorship, the pregame, the in-game inventory, but it's changing. And I think what we're going to find more and more across broader audiences is they are 100% expecting that they can curate their own experience. And if that's going to be a mixture of multiple media channels and inputs, and how do we find that audience? Again, we can't rely on them finding us. We have to find them, and we have the ability to do that. That's the great power of the connected TV platforms, is that it sits on a ID base, and you can go interact with those users in a different way, in the way that they want to be interacted with.
Yep. And I'd be remiss in saying, having working for Comcast, that we can also do that through household addressable as well. So, there's a lot of opportunity there. Let me ask you this sort of final question around TV rights, and tying it kind of all together around the sort of the new platforms that are emerging. Another interesting dynamic about that fragmentation that we talked about is that TV rights landscape is now getting a lot more competitive. Some of those larger digital platforms, for example, like Amazon, are now in the sports content game, and as leagues look to renewals, I would love to get your thoughts on that and the implications that has for both advertisers and viewers.
Well, for viewers, it's going to give them, again, more access and more access points. I think this next round of negotiations across all of the leagues, that the NFL is probably next up on the books, is going to be really interesting and really expensive. There's a lot, the digital players have a lot of cash that they can bring to the table. I think it would be really powerful for their platforms to have the access to the games, whether that be exclusive or in a shared way. We've seen Amazon, with their Thursday night football package that they share with Fox and with the NFL Network. We've seen them dip their toe into baseball. But if you look even at what YouTube does with the curation of highlights, and I think we're going to see more players in this space. That I don't think in this round you're going to see the traditional model completely change. There'll still be a place for the big networks to show those showcase games, but there is going to be a lot of pressure from all of those digital platforms, Amazon, Google, Apple, Facebook, because it gives them a real opportunity to connect with a huge audience base, and that content is so critical. We know that what's driving a lot of these platforms is content. Peacock being an example for you guys. The better content you have, the reason to get them there. We've seen Netflix changing their approach now with original movies and original series, and the importance of having content that's going to bring great scale will be really critical. So I'm so excited kind of to watch how this plays out. What I'm not excited for is the price tag, because that price tag is going to be high, and ultimately that's passed along to consumers, passed along to advertisers. And I think we're going to have to think about, how do we offset that and be more creative and get the equal value. So I think another piece of these negotiations will be, what can advertisers do? So if I'm paying more, how can those media owners go to their brands and say, look, we can offer you new and innovative things to do in that space, again, as opposed to just running a 30-second ad.
That's great, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, James, great to see you. Thanks.